So welcome back everyone. In today's lecture we're going to be talking about the conventions that we have to use when we have multiple classes in a single Java file. So before we start today's lecture, let us first create a class. So let's call this box demo. So I'm basically using the example from the previous class. Let's put a main method here, void main string args. So now let me save this file. Well, you see, when I have to save this file, I have to first give it a name. Well, the convention according to the Java language specification, or JLS, is that your file name must have the same name as the class containing the main method. So your box demo class contains the main method, which means your file name should be the same as your class name here, which is box demo. So let me give this same file name. So, and let me run this program, and as you can see, the program has run successfully since it shows finished in 1.3 seconds. So let me delete this file for a second. So this is my .java file, basically my high-level programming language code that I've written here. So when I run this code, it's going to first get compiled to what is known as Java bytecode here, which has a .class extension, and afterwards it is this .java, this .class file or bytecode is interpreted by the Java virtual machine. So you already know all of this. So the new thing that we just learned is that your file name must have the same method as the class containing the main method. So actually what happens when I don't do that? So let's try that. So I'm now, instead of writing box demo, I'm going to remove an O from here. So let me run this same program again. So as you can see, I have gotten an error. It's saying class box demo is public, should be declared in a file name boxdemo.java. So as you can see, since my class name and my file name did not match, I'm getting an error shown here. Okay. Now why this error is being thrown out is because of convention that the Java language specification has already determined or set for us. Okay. So now let me again do something new. Let me create another file. Let me call this box, and for simplicity's sake I'm going to give it just one. Let me just give it two variables, length and width. Okay, you know what, for consistency's sake I'll use the same three variables that I used before. Okay, so now if I run this program, let's see what happens. Well, as you can see, I'm getting an error here. Why? It's saying class box is public, should be declared in a file name box.java. So the thing is, you can have multiple classes in one Java file, in a single .java file. However, only one of them can be public. So basically I have two classes here. I cannot have two public classes. Only one of them can be public. So the question is, which one of this access modifiers, so we know that this public here is an access modifier, so which one of these access modifiers do we get rid of? Well, if you read the next bullet point, it says the class that contains the main method should be public. So this means if you want to have public classes, you can have only one in a single .java file, and the class that contains the main method has to be the one that gets to use this public access modifier. So basically if I get rid of this, I can run this program without getting any errors. Whereas instead, if I were to get rid of the access modifier here, let's see what happens. You see, I'm getting an error. It's saying class box is public, should be declared in a file name box.java file. Okay, so one way of getting around this would be, okay, so let us first run this program. So as you can see, when I run this program, I instantly get an error, which is a compilation error. As a result, I did not get any Java bytecode produced here. Whereas if I got rid of this public here and kept the public here instead of removing it, my code would have compiled and I would have gotten 2 Java bytecode files. So as you can see, each of these classes contains its own Java bytecode file. And previously you saw I cannot have 2 public classes in one single file. So a way to fix this would be, if you need your other class to be public as well, is to create a new file. So let's call this box. Okay. So now as you can see, if I run this program, let me delete this, my code has been successfully compiled. However, as you can see, since my main method is the part of my program that is actually interpreted by my JVM, since it had no code that called this box class, the Java bytecode for this box class was not generated. So basically you can have thousands of other class files in other, basically what I'm trying to say is that you can have thousands of other files with multiple classes inside them. But until and unless your main method explicitly creates an object of one of those classes, there's not going to be any bytecode generated by the compiler for those classes. So only the classes that are going to get used are going to have bytecode generated for them. So let's try creating an object. Okay, so now that we've created a box object, let me delete the old class file, and now let me compile this. As you can see, now I have 2 class files here, whereas previously, since this other box class was never being used, our compiler did not generate any bytecode for this file. Whereas in contrast, again let me delete these 2 files. If I bring this box class here, and as you can see, I've commented this line out, which means this class is not being used in any way, right? However, since it's in a single file, it's still going to get compiled. As you can see, this box class generated this Java bytecode class file. Whereas previously, if you had this in a separate file, let's say here, and let me again delete this and let me rerun this, I was not getting this, basically this class or this class was not being compiled since it was not being used, whereas only if I commented out this line, would this class be used, then my compiler would generate some bytecode for it. Okay. So what we learned is that, first of all, you can have multiple classes in a single .java file. So you can have, say, 2 classes in a single .java file. However, only one of them can be public. We saw previously that when we had 2 public classes, we were getting an error thrown. Furthermore, we saw that the class that contains the main method should be public, which meant that if I were to get rid of this public here, I would still get an error. Okay. Finally, you can also have a class containing the main method that isn't public, as long as there are no other public classes in the same file. So what it's trying to say is that it's possible to have a main method that is not inside a public class. So how is that possible? You have to get rid of this public here. So let me run this, and as you can see, this is perfectly executed. So basically, again, you can have multiple classes in a single .java file. However, only one of them can be public. So the class that contains the main method should be public. So if you want to have any of this, if you want to like give an access modifier, a public access modifier to any of these classes, only the one that contains the main method can be given it. And finally, we saw that you can have a class containing the main method that isn't public, as we just saw here in this example. Okay, so let's get back to the file naming convention. We saw that your file must have the same name as the class containing the main method. Otherwise, we were getting an error. So let me again show this to you. Let me delete this box file and let me just call this box dem. And when I run this, as you can see, it's saying an error. Could not find or load main class box dem. However, if you notice something, my two class files have been compiled. Their equivalent bytecodes have been generated. So if I were to comment this line out, this still would have held true, as you can see here. So the question is, how is my compilation process being successfully carried out, but somehow my JVM is messing up? Well, the reason for that is that if you have multiple classes in a single file, your compiler knows which class contains the main method from the file name. It does not have to scan all the classes to figure that out. So basically, when you have a file name here, this file name is used to indicate which class contains the main method. So as you can see, your JVM, when it gets this bytecode files, your JVM is going to look for a class that's named boxdem. But there is no class named boxdem, is there? So hence you are getting an error here that said could not find or load main class boxdem. Your JVM is looking for a file named boxdem, but it is obviously nowhere to be found because it does not exist. So this is why you must have the same file name as your class that contains the main method. Why? Because this is what the Java language specification says, and it's so that you can have faster compilation. Why? Because your compiler does not have all the classes, does not have to scan all the classes to figure out which one contains the main method. It can just send a signal to the JVM that this class contains the main method. So as a result, this results in faster compilation. And as for the public convention that we saw earlier, that only the class containing the main method should be public, enforces better code readability. So you can just instantly look at any number of classes and figure out which one contains the main method. So this can be one of the reasons. However, technically, it is still possible to run a program where the name of the class containing the main method and the file name do not match. So basically what I'm trying to say is that this file, which is giving me an error here, that box class demo is public, should be declared in a file name. Okay. So technically it is still possible to run a program where the name of the class containing the main method and the file do not match. Let me write this in bracket, only when the class isn't public. So basically we know that, let me just create another file for this, and let me just write here wrong class, wrong file name. Okay. So this is my correct file naming convention, right? So I can run this, absolutely no issues whatsoever. So I could also run this, absolutely no issues whatsoever. However, let's open the wrong file name class and let me delete this all bytecodes here. When I run this, I get an error. So this error is a compilation error. How do you know this is a compilation error? Well, as you can see, I did not have any bytecode generated. However, you can avoid this compilation error in one way, which is, as I said here, technically it is possible to run a program where the name of the class containing the main method and the file name do not match only when the class isn't public. So let me get rid of this public access modifier and let me run this program. So as you can see, my JVM failed to load the class. So my JVM was looking for a class called wrong file name. Since the name of my file is wrong file name, it was looking for a class with a similar name. However, my compiler was successful in compiling the code here. So from my terminal, let me run this program. So when I was running from my IDE, I was getting an error. So let me just let me just remove these files and compile the program from my terminal. So let's call wrong Java file name. As you can see, I have compiled these two files, and now I know that my box demo class contains the main method. So I'm telling my JVM that my box demo class here contains the main method. And so as you can see, it ran perfectly. So for convenience, let me just write something along the lines of system.out.println success. And let me delete this old bytecode files and let me compile the program here from my IDE. So I ran the program from my IDE. The program had a runtime error. So runtime error happens when your JVM fails with something. So as you can see, my JVM failed to load the wrong file name class because it does not exist. However, my compiler was successful. So there was no compiler error. So basically, I can now manually say to my JVM that run the box demo file, box demo class file. So the box demo class file is the class that contains the main method. As you can see, when I run this, I get this success message. Whereas when I was running this from my IDE, I was getting a runtime error. So the thing is, the reason for this is my JVM is looking for a class that has the same file name as my file name here. Whereas here, basically, I was telling my JVM explicitly, no, the main method is here in a box demo class. Whereas with the case of the IDE, this error was being generated because the JVM was doing something like this, wrong file name. So as you can see, when you tell your JVM to load this wrong file name class, it does not exist, and hence it was throwing out this error. So basically, in short, this was how you should name files and when you should use a public access modifier before your class names. So we'll learn about access modifiers in details about the different types when we learn about inheritance. So right now, if I talk about packages and subclasses, you won't be able to understand them as well. So we'll talk about the different type of access modifiers in another class. But basically, to recap, again, you can have multiple classes. You can have multiple classes in a single .java file. So as you can see, I have multiple classes here. However, only one of them can be public. It is not necessary. Let me write this here. It is not necessary that at least one class is public. So as you can see, I do not have at least one class that is public. Basically, none of my classes here are public, but at most only one of my classes here can be public. So I could have had multiple other rectangle, circle, other types of box classes here that weren't cuboid shaped. Technically they would not be called boxes then. Well, anyways, moving on. And finally, the class that contains the main method should be public. So if you want to use a public access modifier, it must be used for the class that contains the main method. And finally, you can also have a class contain a main method that isn't public. So we saw it previously that it's not necessary that your main method be a class that is public as well. Finally, we saw that your file must have the same name as the class containing the main method. Well, the reason for this is so that your JVM knows which class file contains the main method, which class file here contains the main method. So as a result of following these principles, you will be able to enforce better code readability and faster compilation. Well, technically, if you mess this up, your code even won't compile. So it's not just for faster compilation, it's also to ensure that your code executes perfectly. So this is about file naming and access modifier for classes when there are multiple of them in a single file.